Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday. As you know, today is a little bit special. If you have not been keeping up with my tweets or in my Discord or anything like that, today we have the absolute pleasure of talking with Rob Yescombe, who's a freelance video game writer and narrative director within the video game industry. You have probably seen a lot of his work, even though you may not be aware of it at the time, but he's worked for Sony, EA, Ubisoft, Activision, Valve, LucasArts, you name it. This guy's been involved in it, and I'm extremely excited to get to talk to him today. So I'm not going to waste much more of your time. We want to be respectful of his as well. We're going to be talking, starting off, about The Invisible Hours, which is the newest game that he has just released, which started off in VR. So I'm going to kick it over to a trailer for that, and then we're going to dive right in. So take a look.
Why would one of us want to murder Nikola Tesla? The man was a genius.
I have my suspicions. And I will catch this killer.
I'm Thomas Edison. When your name is up in lights, those are my lights.
If you don't give me what I want, I'll tell everyone the truth about you.
Why would Tesla pay to have a blind assistant?
To keep his secret safe from prying eyes.
She's the most famous stage actress in the world. So she lies for a living.
I'm giving him what he wants most. Another dead son.
Why did you run?
Because I'm a murderer.
Now hear this, all of you! I know you think I'm a fool.
No!
But I promise you, this will not go unpunished. This will not go unpunished! Stop! If I were to watch you, and you didn't know I was there, what would I see?
You'd see the truth. Of course.
Excellent. Welcome on in. How are you doing today? You're live. We're live now.
Oh, me? Or
yes, yes, you. I'm going to look at you right here. I got the two cameras right here.
Doing very well. Thank you for having me. What a pleasure it is to be in.
It's so great to see you. I had the absolute pleasure of meeting you while I was streaming The Invisible Hours in VR. You were very kind to, I guess, see the tweet, come on in and give me some hints and tips and some really cool super secrets about the game that I don't think I would have found out on my own. So that was really cool. What's that?
I'm always happy to loiter.
Yes, and that you did, and in a wonderful way. So for those who may not know, why don't you give us a brief rundown then of what The Invisible Hours is about?
Oh boy. So this is kind of a long route to explaining what it is, but it's murder mystery. That's the important thing to know. But the thing that's unusual about The Invisible Hours is that we were trying to sort of replicate the way that story happens in real life. The way the story happens in real life is that as you and I are having this conversation at 10:01 my time, you are the protagonist of your story and I'm a humble supporting character, but in the exact same unit of time. Well, I'm the protagonist, and sorry, you're just the supporting character. And the people walking past the window over here, they're background characters in both of our stories, but we're background characters in theirs. And all of those stories need to be perfectly synchronized, perfectly interwoven, perfectly simultaneous in order for this moment of reality to exist in this way. So The Invisible Hours is a murder mystery, sort of Agatha Christie style murder mystery. It takes 1 hour to go through, but because there are 7 suspects in that story, there's actually 7 hours of narrative interwoven within the single hour. So if you go into that space and say, oh, well, that person looks suspicious, I'm going to follow them up to the attic. However long you spend up there, you're missing what's happening in the drawing room, the dining room, the bedroom, the basement, and so on. So even though the story never changes, you and I can have completely different perspectives on the exact same unit of time, purely based on how we explore. So in the same way we do in real life, that our opinions on people and events are based on the parts that we do or don't see and how we assemble those to form a vision of reality for ourselves.
I love it. I loved the way the mechanics are working, because I know I was doing a little digging, and I think you coined the phrase spherical gaming experience because you didn't quite like the cinematic gaming experience. Because with this game, it's really more of you get to be a bystander, but view it from everybody's point of view. Like you were saying, take that hour back, maybe follow a different character to unearth more of the story.
Well, one of the crucial things about the Invisible Hours is that we say right up front, it's not a game. But it's also not a movie, and it has things in common with theatre, but it's also not theatre. What we wanted to do was to create an experience that's flexible enough that if you behave like it's a game, it feels more like a game because there are game elements to it. But if you behave like it's a movie, it's going to play like a movie. But if you behave like it's theatre, it behaves like theatre. If you dive into it completely freeform or want to wander around it like you're in real life, it can do all those things too. So we didn't want to create something where the systems were imposing on your experience of the narrative. The point of it is that it's freeform. And no matter how you watch it, forwards, backwards, out of sync, it's always going to eventually form a cohesive narrative to you. So, but what that the benefit of that is that in just about every scene in the Invisible Hours, depending on the order that you've watched scenes in, or depending on what scenes you have or haven't seen, your interpretation of what the scene means, who has the power in the scene, what someone's intent is in the scene, changes, even though the scene is always the same. So I guess we can talk about spoilers because you already streamed it.
Right.
In the case of Bernhardt, who's the actress, and Mundy, who's when he's captured, we think he's a killer.
Right.
They have a romantic scene together and they kiss. And some people see that scene and they see, oh, okay, this is a little piece of romance. Some people see that scene and say, oh, there's a conspiracy between these two.
That's what I would think. Yeah, cahoots. Yeah.
And some people, like I think you did, saw it in the order where you discover that they're actually father and daughter and they don't know they're father and daughter. So you have this like repulsion to the scene.
I really did.
Even though the scene's always the same. So what changes is you.
Mm-hmm. And I think it really depended too on like who you decided to follow first, right? So like in my case, I had discovered that little piece of information before I had decided to follow Mundy and the actress now, her name escapes me. Yes. And so going into it, yeah. And I really enjoyed, because I think you were the one that was telling me too, that you can interact with a little bit that's going on in there too. So as you're moving through the world and observing, you pick up more clues by being able to interact. So taking the locket out of their hand in the beginning scene to learn maybe a little bit more, or the one secret you told me, maybe listen to the telephone while he's on it. What's going on back there? And I would have never thought about that, which is why I really was intrigued about how you implemented it being a game. If that...
Well, it's probably important to mention to people, when we talk about interaction, it doesn't mean interruption.
Yes.
Because if you have something as complex as this, interrupting the narrative makes it sort of makes the production go from what we had, which was about a few million euro, into some big, enormous, expansive thing where you're having to do branches and spherical narrative together, which is a huge, big proposition. So the form of interaction is, if you take an object out of a character's hand, there's sort of a ghost version of that you're taking. So you can examine clues that might recontextualize information that you already know, or might make you interpret something that you're going to see in a different way. So you learn more about characters. But again, nothing that you pick up is essential, but everything you pick up is valuable. So we didn't want any of that, the what we call the sublayer of narrative, which is in documents and objects, to be something that you couldn't enjoy it unless you did that. Also, we didn't want to make it so that that it wasn't pointless. And there's lots of stuff in games where you're sort of fleshing out lore and all that sort of stuff. And some people love that stuff. But I find that, generally speaking, lore is kind of a bottomless well that you rarely get something meaningful out of.
Right.
So it was important that all of those objects had something that was pertinent to the main narrative, and yet themselves are a sort of mystery unto themselves.
So not going to write a ton of books just for people to be able to flip through and read their own stuff about each character, and put in all that time and effort.
There is stuff there that is about the background of those characters, but the crucial thing is that needs to be meaningful to plot. It can't just be like, well, here's a biog of somebody.
Right.
That adds a bit of tapestry to a world, but I think there's more responsibility that we have as writers, which is to make sure that that stuff is very meaningful to a person who might only pick up one object in the whole game. Everything has to have something of meaningful value.
I like that. I really do. Now, this one was built 100% for VR, correct? That was the initial, that was what was in mind?
Yeah. So the way we arrived at that was, so I'd been working with a studio in Madrid called Tequila Works, so I wrote a game called Rhyme for. We worked together on The Invisible Hours. And at the time, this was in the early days of VR, where people weren't really sure, they weren't sure what unit sales were going to be like. And so all the information we had was lots of people were getting into cardboard and gear, those sort of preliminary forms of VR.
Right.
And we thought, well, there's lots of people there who aren't gamers, and they're not ready for something that is, we as games developers, we want to make the Matrix. We want the VR to be completely immersive. We want to achieve that, and in time we will. But for a person whose first VR experience and maybe first game experience is at that entry level, you can't ask them to take all that responsibility for their own entertainment. They need something in between. So our feeling was, well, one of the most fun things to do in VR is look around. So why not build a product that you don't need to learn how to do something? In the same way that when people, like when your grandma was playing the Wii, in order to play tennis, you just need to know how to do, to wave her arm around. And that's kind of how we wanted to do this, that you can get a very detailed experience if that's how you want to play it, but there aren't a bunch of systems that you need to learn in order to do it. So we thought, well, when all those people graduate from that preliminary VR experience, what is going to be waiting for them to move into that isn't a full game? So that's how we initially came to this kind of product.
I think it worked out extremely well, especially with it being a way of telling the story. I really, and I know that you can play it now, not on VR also. So if you don't have a VR system at home, you can still play this game. And I do highly recommend it if you're into really story heavy games like that. But I thought it really did add something to it. I got to be standing right in the middle of it, direct my own scene, if you will. I could look at it from whatever angle that I wanted to look at it from, pause it, rewind it, follow that next person around. I think with this medium, I think it worked out beautifully for it. I'm very fortunate that I got to play it in VR first. Let's put it that way. I feel great that I got to.
When you're playing in VR, so much of, and I'll talk about the process about how we built the actual product.
Yeah.
The fun thing about VR is that you really get a sense of body language and a sense of what the blocking of the scene is trying to achieve in a different way than you get when it's flat. I think when it's flat, watching people play it flat, there's a much more analytical approach that people take to it, in a way that when you're in VR, you can't help but feel sort of part of the scene. Sure. And both of those experiences are equally valid. But it's interesting to see the division between the two. But in terms of how we built the thing, so one of the tricky things about what we call the spherical narrative is that all of these scenes are all baked animation. They're all basically, it's basically like a giant cutscene with 7 hours of character animation if you lay it all end to end. But all of those individual scenes need to fit together. So if you and I are characters in a scene, and in 1 minute and 9 seconds, you're going to have to leave that scene and then enter another scene that's already in progress, and you need to interrupt that scene at 3 minutes, 5 seconds. Not only are we calculating the moment you've got to leave this scene and the moment you've got to interrupt that scene, we've also got to calculate the distance between the two scenes. Maybe it's 2 stories up. And then when you're traveling between those two scenes, are you happy? Are you sad? Are you injured? Are you running? Are you walking? So the distance and time needs to factor into that calculation as well. And then you're doing that across 7 by 7 by 7 by 7 across an hour.
Yeah.
So there's no way that you could do what people often do, which is that you turn up on the mocap stage, motion capture stage, and just say, well, let's riff and see what happens. So you cannot do that.
Oh, okay.
So unusual for games, we spent 3 weeks rehearsing every single scene within a 4-second margin, because you're in this weird space where if you over rehearse a scene, then you're sort of driving the humanity out of the scene. But if you under-rehearse it, you're going to get up on the mocap stage. And we were a relatively small indie production, and we couldn't afford an infinite amount of time on the stage. So everything was rehearsed within a 4-second margin, and then we had to say to ourselves, well, we've got to be confident enough to say when we get to the mocap stage, we're going to trim that somehow. We're going to do it in an interesting and organic way. But all of the blocking, all of the geometry, all of the key performance decisions were all made up front. So when you go to the stage, you just execute. And for the most part, it worked. So.
No, so now, was there like a stage set up for them to act in that space? Because now I'm kind of curious how the filming for something like that goes, if the timing is so crucial. So
obviously you don't film it all at once. That's the crucial thing. So we build what's called an animatic. So an animatic it takes a 3-dimensional model of the house, and then you have think of characters like chess pieces, and you say, well, okay, they're going to spend 2 minutes here. Then this one's going to get to this point over here and has to be there by this time. So you're building the whole thing as basically like a little 3D chessboard. That tells you how long the scenes are going to be. Just a little sidebar, the paradox of writing a spherical narrative is that you need to know, and this is where it gets weird, you need to know exactly how long every scene is going to be to the second before you write it. And that's where it gets really tricky. That's the part where you're taking kind of a leap of faith to say, well, okay, I have the confidence to know that the dramatic and plot requirements of this scene can be achieved in this exact amount of time, and will not take any longer and will not take any shorter. So in terms of how you capture those scenes, in that sense, it's sort of the conventional way you would capture motion capture, which is that you have a motion capture stage. People have the ping pong balls on them that everybody knows. And then you block out on that stage the geometry of the scene that you're going to be in. So if there's going to be a virtual table there, you say, well, okay, this is the space where the table is going to be, and then we'll put a little prop there to say, okay, don't walk through this table.
Okay.
And then you just go scene by scene by scene by scene, and you're leaning into all the organization that you did in that rehearsal and pre-production period to make sure that when you're on the mocap stage, you're not figuring things out.
Oh my gosh. So did it ever come to a point where you had it written, you're like, this is going to work, and then as you were seeing it performed, you had to make adjustments probably?
Every scene. Because even with the animatic, knowing, okay, this is exactly how long every scene needs to be, you write it, you perform it to yourself and say, well, okay, I think we're within the margin here. But then you get to the stage and you realize, it's more interesting if this person says nothing at all. Or it's more interesting if this person says twice as much, or we haven't got the time to get the blocking that we want in the scene that communicates the power balance, and have this dialogue as well, or whatever exchange it may be. So every single scene in that rehearsal period, where it's just us in an empty room for a few weeks, every single scene went through the process of cutting and rewriting and rewriting.
How long was this process to do the entire game?
To do the entire game.
Because from an indie perspective, I'm looking at it like I know that funding runs out. Your crunch, you usually got to do things in a much faster fashion if you've got it, you've got them there.
Well, it was the pre-production and early production was fairly smooth. We had some issues in managing the data coming out of the mocap, but it's just every production has its rough spot.
Sure.
But from conception to being on the shelf, I don't know. I mean, it took 4 months to write.
Okay.
And that was like all out every day, making sure that was, all the intents were there. Then there was a casting period that was a bit amorphous. That probably took us about 4 or 5 weeks. Then the rehearsal period was about 3 to 4 weeks. In which time you're also kind of rewriting at the same time. The shoot itself was 3 weeks of shooting, but we did week on, week off, because like 3 weeks of shooting, 14-hour days. That's a lot to ask of anybody. So we did week off. We did part of the shooting at a mocap stage in Oxford in the UK, but most of the shooting we did at a studio in Angoulême in France that did us a great deal and were great. Yeah. And then there was about a year of post after that to get everything assembled.
So what's the bigger challenge then, going from like the flat to the VR experience?
I think on a mechanical level, or on a writing level, there's not really a difference between the two.
Because you had a much bigger role in this one, right? More directing for this particular game, or is that something pretty natural for you to do when you're writing for a game?
Well, it varies. I mean, I've worked on things where I'm kind of you have a sort of mercenary role where you'll fill the role of a writer and then leave it to somebody else to figure out. But in the case of Invisible Hours, I was what's called a narrative director, which is sort of it was in close collaboration with Raul Rubio, who's the creative director at Tequila Works.
Okay.
And I think even though he and I sort of figured out the concept together, but he was very gracious and sort of left me to do the script, and mostly left me to do the casting, and I directed the performances as well. And that was in collaboration with an animation director called Damon Tasker, who's now at Valve as well. But the role that I played on this is probably the closest you would get to a quote-unquote film director than you would normally get in games, I guess. It's there are cinematics directors, but it's rare for those cinematic directors to also be the writer. So it was sort of,
sure.
One of the interesting things about working in games is that I've been doing it 16 years. I still don't really know what a game is, because it's such an amorphous medium, and in that the roles that we play in it are kind of amorphous as well. So on this product, that's what was necessary for someone like me to do. On another product, it'll be something else.
Was that something you really enjoyed doing? Is it fun to wear all those different hats and be so hands-on with the project, or does it just vary for you?
It's interesting because in the same year that I wrote The Invisible Hours, I also wrote another VR game called Farpoint.
Yes.
Which was the first game to use the PSVR aim controller. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Farpoint, I was writing within the parameters that the studio had, and all I did was deliver a script, and then it was kind of on them. And in the case of Invisible Hours, it was the complete opposite, where kind of everything on the narrative was on me, at least from a writing and executing performance point of view. But in the case of Farpoint, the cinematics in Farpoint, I absolutely love what they did, and I couldn't in a million years have executed what those guys did. But I don't think someone else could have done what I did in the case of Invisible Hours, because you needed to have such an intimate understanding of the mathematics of that story in order to make it possible. Because in the case of The Invisible Hours, one of the other structural things that you may or may not have picked up in those scenes is that every single scene is setting up a new mystery or is paying off an existing mystery over and over and over again. So it means that the probability of you getting swept into one thread of that story is very high. And that's only, like, you couldn't have a director come in and say, well, I've read the script, I think I know what this is about, I think we can cut that line, I think we can cut that line, but you're going to cut something that is a piece of the tapestry that allows that to function.
Yeah. So that's a very unique position to be able to be in, because you can see it from both sides of it instead of just, here's my baby, do what you need to do with it, right?
Sure. But different projects require a different approach. I mean, the way I describe it is that in every game as a writer, you are trying to solve a new equation. And every project needs a different narrative equation. Some are very similar, but nothing's ever the same. So yeah, I enjoyed the way that we made this one, but I wouldn't insist on making something else in the same way.
Right.
It's about what the individual product needs on a case-by-case basis.
So is this story the idea that you had first and then decided it to be in VR, or were you approached for like, hey, we would like to do a VR project, and then the story kind of came to be with that mindset?
It was an interesting path because I already had a good relationship with Tequila Works because we made Rhyme together, which is a flat game, and Rhyme it couldn't be more different to The Invisible Hours, because Rhyme is a story where we're trying to tell a story that is as rich and allegorical as something like Life of Pi, but there's no dialogue in the whole game. So everything is told with art and symbolism. Yeah. Whereas The Invisible Hours, of course, is really the complete opposite. It's all about dialogue. It's all about the minutiae of human interactions. And Tequila Works had acquired some funding to make something in VR. They had in mind to do something that was much more contained than what we ended up doing. They wanted to do something that was kind of like Rear Window, that would be a fixed position and maybe see a bunch of different windows. And I was having lunch with Raoul and Risa Cohen, who was the executive producer on this, or one of the executive producers on it. And I said, well, look, I was explaining our theory then about, what are all these people who are coming into the preliminary hardware of VR, like gear and cardboard, what are they going to do when they want to do something that's not that, but isn't a game? So that's how we sort of came to the structure of what the product was going to be. In terms of the creative, Raoul and I have very similar tastes, so we both kind of arrived on the idea of doing something that was Agatha Christie-ish, and we also knew that it was going to be a murder mystery because part of the experience is about the imperative to keep looking. And you could do, and this is a little sidebar, it was crucial to us that the way that the story is told is not part of the fiction. So there are probably moments when you were playing it that maybe you thought, oh, maybe I am Tesla, or maybe I'm a ghost, or maybe all those things. So lots of people have those theories. But it was important to us that it was not any of those things, because we want to be able to say, hey, you could do an episode of a medical drama like this. You could do an episode of Downton Abbey like this. You could use that. You can apply this structure to existing IP. You can apply this structure to other genre, because this isn't about the Invisible Hours. This is about the way the Invisible Hours is told. So I've gone for the massive tangent now. I forget why I was.
Well, no, what was first, the idea or the VR, right? Yeah.
The very, 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 very first idea that we had that was sort of leaning into the idea of that structure. So we thought about doing something like Westworld, and this is before the Westworld reboot.
Sure.
So we toyed with the idea of doing something that was like VR within VR and all that sort of stuff. But eventually we were like, well, I think we need to make something that is your grandma can play it and kind of understand where she's at, not just mechanically, but also in the genre that you're in. So everybody understands what a murder mystery is, and part of your ability to keep up with the story in the Invisible Hours is that it kind of leans into notions that you're familiar with from murder mystery, even though it never really embraces those cliches. Hopefully, it's close enough to them that you can sort of hold on to the information while you're off on some other tangent.
Right. Love it. So definitely check this out, guys. The Invisible Hours. It's on Steam right now that you can check it out. So let's kind of dive in a little bit more on your involvement with VR, because it seems like you've been really trying to spearhead that experience a little bit more from your perspective. So what was it about VR that really caught your eye that you wanted to try to create more content with that particular medium?
Well, when you've been in games as long as I have, as much as I love them, after this amount of time, you're not, most of the time, you're not working on products that are new pieces of design. They are one way or another a reskin of some pre-existing design. Nothing wrong with that, but it means that eventually you sort of feel like you're repeating yourself. And the first time I tried VR, I immediately knew, I was like, well, even mechanics that are old and boring suddenly are imbued with meaning again in VR. I don't know if you've played there's a military simulator called Onward, and I remember the first time I played Onward, where if you're playing Call of Duty and you press X to reload, plays an animation, you reload. But then being in VR and having to like take the magazine out and check whether it would, and then put it all in and pull the slider and all that stuff, it just suddenly that was like, wow, this is just the act of reloading.
New way, yeah.
A billion times in a billion games, suddenly really exciting. And this is sort of a long route to answering your question, but on the subject of Call of Duty, back in the days when I still played it, I found that whenever I was in a multiplayer game, I sucked. And the reason why I sucked at Call of Duty was because I was always trying to create a single player experience for myself. I was trying to create a cinematic moment.
You didn't want to lean into the player versus player element of it. Yeah.
Right. And but I wanted it to be something that sort of felt human and organic and surprising. But that wasn't really the environment to have that experience. And the beauty of VR is that you are immersed in it. And it's, you hear the term immersion all the time. But for people that haven't tried it, it is almost impossible to explain the difference.
Right.
Between looking at it on the screen and being in it. I mean, it is transformative. And I mean, I've talked about this at length in other places, but you know, I come to VR from a point of view of entertainment. But the reason why TV is such a ubiquitous medium, the reason why computers are such a ubiquitous medium, is not because they're fun entertainment products. It's because they're tools for education. And that's the thing that you can really see with VR down the line, that this is something that's going to change the way that people educate and are educated. So for me, I'm having fun doing the entertainment side of it, but
you really see the progress that can be made in that. Yeah.
It will take time. I mean, it is still a niche medium. There are still things that make it difficult for people, but you only got to look at the Quest, which you can pre-order now, the Oculus Quest. We're already at a place where wires are kind of becoming old news. Or if you're looking for something that is, really, really high res, really, really fancy room scale VR, the Valve Index as well is coming out. But the crucial thing is that the affordability is just around the corner.
It's getting there in certain places. Yeah, I mean, it depends too if you have like a PC that can run it though as well, which I know is like.
Well, that's the important thing about the Quest. There is no PC. There's no wires. There's no setup. It's all inside-out tracking, which means that you literally just put it on your head and it works. And it's not like the gear. It's not like cardboard. It's full 6 degrees of motion. And in terms of what it's capable of doing, yeah, it's not as powerful as a PC, but I promise you, it's going to do more than you think it can do.
I've heard great things about it. The Quest I've not gotten into. I've tried Rift. Well, I have a Rift, the original. I know the S is coming out here soon. And I have tried the Rift S. I've done the Vive, I believe, and I've done PlayStation. I think that might be the gamut of all that I've tried. And I've not tried the Quest yet, but I've heard really good things about it from people who have at least gotten a chance to get their hands on it for a few minutes.
One of the most amazing things about the Quest is that we think of VR as being like a thing that you got to set up. You've got to set up the cameras and plug in your PC and do all that stuff. The Quest, you can wander out to a football field, put it on, and it will work.
Yeah, and so yeah, the Quest is the standalone headset. So it's just exactly how it sounds. I believe there's an application that you can put on your phone, or maybe you don't even need the app, but that's how you would talk to the headset with what game that you're wanting to play. And literally you put it on and you're in. There's no sensors to have to set up or anything like that.
Right. I see in chat there someone saying the biggest problem with VR at the moment is locomotion. Teleportation breaks immersion for me, and smooth locomotion causes motion sickness.
That's very true.
It's true, but when Henry Ford first made the automobile and people were going 10 miles an hour, like gripping onto their seat.
That's true.
The thing about VR locomotion and motion sickness is that a friend of mine, Damon Tasker, who was the animation director on The Invisible Hours, he suffered from the same thing. Smooth motion gave him motion sickness.
It does to me too. I'm a little better now, but yeah.
Right. The more you do it, the less sickness you get, and that's a real thing. It's like getting used to motion in the same way that people were gripping onto their seats when they're in the first Ford. It seems like a lot to have to get over if you feel sick and you're in VR and you're getting motion sickness. And by the way, there are lots of products that don't do that. Yeah. You can still enjoy VR without smooth motion. But if you want to get over the hump, it's well worth getting your sea legs, because it really just changes everything. Like I'm at a point. I'm lucky to be at a point where you can zoom around in Google VR with none of the safety stuff on and just fly like Superman around the earth and just
I can't do. I can't do it.
But it's well worth forcing yourself to sort of get used to it, to train yourself, like going to the gym. You're sending your brain to the gym to say, "Hey, brain, this is okay. You don't need to feel sick. It's nothing to worry about." But it's well worth.
It is well worth it. And yeah, like after about an hour, I mean, it was one of those things, like to your point there, Captain E-Rock, you're like, after an hour, I can't take it. Don't do it for an hour, so like maybe do it for 10, 15 minutes at a time. If you start to feel sick, put it down,
And I think of it as like, before I got into VR, I was still playing flat games, and I'd play like 4 hours a day or something like that. And I think of VR as like a rich chocolate cake. You just need a thin little slice to get the same sensation. And again, like it's hard to sort of get people to empathize with the difference. On paper, you're like, well, I'm looking at a screen that looks like a game. Why wouldn't I have the same experience as playing a game? But it is totally different, I promise you.
Yeah, I know I have a get my sea legs stance, which I'm sure looks ridiculous, but when I'm trying to train myself to actually just move how you would through an environment in real life, because I do the same thing. I point at it, I morph to it, I'm fine. That movement seems to be good for me. But I found you got to take like a surfboard stance, man. That's what works for me. And because I had that moment of the first time you try to stand and move in it like that, you wobble because your brain is thinking you're supposed to be moving and you're not. So that's the first thing that was the hardest for me too. And I'm still working on getting over, honestly.
Well, we're also at a point where, I mean, it's better now, but in the early years of VR, we still didn't know what best practice was. So if you wanted to do smooth movement from point A to point B, if you're playing a flat game, there are all sorts of movement curves that you can apply, and none of those are going to cause anybody any problems.
Right.
But in VR, there are very specific movement curves that need to be applied to make sure that you don't feel sick. The amount of acceleration, if any, and how you move between those two spaces, you can mostly protect against motion sickness.
And I've been giving it a shot. I'm liking the fact that I'm getting a little bit better with it because it does provide a much different experience that I find I am enjoying more. Like to your point, when you were saying that it kind of breaks the immersion for you to do the locomotion, I can understand that. So it's definitely worth giving it a shot. I have been enjoying it a lot more like that, but I'm the same way. I can only do it for like 20 minutes or so at a time, and then I have to put it down and start over something else. We'll dive in a little bit more. I don't know if there's been any questions that David, actually I could probably check to see if any questions. Yep, he's got some stuff coming up there. But there's one thing that I read in one of your bios that I had to ask for, because I know that you've written for other mediums other than, video games, although that's where it looked like you had gotten your start. But one of the things that it was talking about is that you did a live action interactive experience, Resident Evil Live, which terrified audiences at a Game City festival. And The Guardian says 6 people cried with fear.
Well, there's
and I want to know about this live experience.
Something you did. That was way back in the day. So there used to be, that sadly no more. There used to be a fantastic independent games festival in Nottingham in the UK called Game City, and everything that we did was volunteer work. So it wasn't a paid gig or anything like that. But we would try and take like classic games and try and turn them into live action experiences. And some people may have been to like horror nights at theme parks and sort of seen like the Walking Dead thing where a zombie comes out and goes, but they're not allowed to touch you. The way that we approached those live action games was that the thing that creates drama is the potential of failure. So being in a Resident Evil type situation where you can lose the game if you don't play it in a sensible way, if you don't collaborate in an interesting way, that creates the fear. It's less about the fear of zombies, although that was a factor for some people, and more about the fear of failure, I think. But that's sort of all mixed up in with the blood and the guts of it.
How much fun was that to write for, though? I feel like that would have been a good time.
Well, that wasn't actually a written thing.
Oh, okay.
That was a piece of design. So what we would do is we would take like whatever space we could get our hands on. So the first year that we ran Resident Evil Live, it was in the service corridors of a hotel, and I won't bore you with the details of it, but it was more about it was like setting up a level basically to say, well, okay, an enemy's going to spawn here, enemy's going to spawn here, enemy's going to spawn here, and how those people who were giving their time to be zombies wanted to behave under the circumstances and rules that we gave them was really the narrative of it. But it was great fun.
It sounds like a lot of fun. I like those. So kind of like a haunted house thing that people would kind of like walk through, but you already had it sort of scripted. It was what was going to happen when.
It was a haunted house, but you could fail. And that's the thing that I think makes you feel more kind of comfortable in the haunted house. You're like, oh, okay, you get a jump scare.
We're going to be fine, yeah.
but then what? And that was the crucial thing in this, is that it was all about the then what.
Oh man, I love it. I just when it said 6 people cried with fear, I'm like, I have to ask about what this was.
I'm very lucky that we weren't sued, because the editor of Edge at the time, she broke her wrist playing it, so it was an innocent time.
But I mean, that could be some great clickbait right there nowadays. Like, this was so intense.
Yeah. She was very gracious about it.
Very good about it. So the process. Let's see. Well, before we move on to more writing stuff, because it looked like Nagellan asks. So, do you think higher frame rates within VR actually is helpful with motion sickness?
It's a factor, but it's about the interplay between movement curves, the type of movement that you're doing. I mean, for instance, you could have a very high frame rate, a completely smooth movement curve, but if it's a spiral that you're looking down into, that might trigger somebody. There are all sorts of factors that are at play. It really depends on the combination of the product, a little bit of the frame rate, a bit of the curve, how long you've been playing it. All those things are a factor. The main thing to know is that motion sickness is a dying condition.
You'll get there. We believe in you, Nagellan. You can make it. What's your favorite VR? Have you tried all of them?
Well, it's interesting, because I just finished a tenure at Valve where I was mainly just sort of nose to the grindstone in that building.
Yeah.
So I haven't played like a different VR thing in like a year, which is terrible. But prior to that, things that I really loved. I really love Onwards, which is that military sim that I mentioned, which is sort of like Counter-Strike in VR. Mm-hmm. I really love A Chair in a Room, Green Water, which is a tiny little game by the guy who, I mean, he's literally like a solo operator who also made The Exorcist VR. And the thing that was so smart about A Chair in a Room is that it was made at a time where people were like, oh, I'm worried about motion sickness. So he said, well, okay, what if the story is told in a series of rooms? And the beauty of A Chair in a Room is that it knows how big your play space is. And so every room you go into is scaled to fit your play space.
I didn't know that info about it. Okay.
Very smart, very, very smart. And it means that you can choose to have a bigger environment where you have to teleport around, but you can play it in a way that requires no navigation at all, which is really just a stroke of genius. Oh, crikey, what else do I really love? Shout out to Dimension Hunter. I think that was a great little shooter.
We're gonna get you in Doom VR. Get you flying around in there.
I wasn't like I like lots of things about it, but it's one of those things where if something isn't ground up, it's always going to be a little bit tricky.
Okay.
Oh man, wait. No, okay, no, wait. Of course, Sorrento. I think Sorrento is fantastic. Tiny little team out in Singapore. Sorrento is basically like being Neo in the Matrix. And it's considering how small the team is, the ambition of that product is incredible. And that was the product that really taught me to get used to motion, because you can like jump 50 feet in the air and like land on people, do sorts of crazy stuff. In Sorrento, eventually it takes time for your brain to get there, but you can backflip in VR.
Oh no.
Sounds like it would make you feel bad, but actually they figured out the movement curves so beautifully that you can your brain upside down and not be affected by it. It's amazing. So Sorrento VR is really good. Oh man, what else I really enjoyed? Going back to the old school, I really loved Irrational Exuberance. It's only like a 10-minute demo, but I think it's really beautiful. The Blue is still really good.
I should be writing all these down.
I've
never played.
I list of things that I recommend to people, but I haven't got it to hand to remember. Oh man, yeah.
There's a lot of fantastic ones out there, but yeah, I don't. If only I were.
And Farpoint as well, because I'm thinking about it in terms of the vibe. But yeah, Farpoint if you're on PSVR, Resi VR if you're on PSVR.
The Blue was one of their favorite that sold you on VR. Okay, I'm gonna have to check that one out. Already got like a viewer recommended here. I'm surprised, but I don't know that I could do the flying thing. Have you ever done, and this is such a silly little thing, I think it's VR Chat. It's like one of those free programs that comes with it. So these players create these rooms for you to just go into and mess around. And there was one room that somebody had figured out how you could fly. And so you had to attach yourself to this box, and you got wings somehow if you could figure out how to get on there, and you could fly around. And so it probably took about 15-20 minutes for me to even figure out how to attach to this box. And as soon as I did, I pushed the joystick forward. I did a little flip, and I've never taken a VR headset off my face so fast in all my life. The motion of me moving forward, not expecting it to be that fast, I had to hard shut down the program. I was like, I can't even put myself back into this. So the thought of flying around and doing a backflip. I
can see a sort of like, a mod version of flying around in VR might not be the best place to start.
Then maybe you're right. Yeah.
There are lots, like, actually, if you want to, what's it called? God, it's been so long since I played it. I think it's called One Giant Leap. It was the first flying experience that I had in VR, where you're basically like Iron Man on the moon. So it's like a sort of semi-gravity, and you have hands that are boosters. You can fly around. That was really good fun. There's a game where your arms are motorbikes that I really enjoyed, and I can't remember the name of that.
Your arms are motorbikes.
Like your arms out as motorbikes, and you drive like that. It's really cool. I'll look into it. I'll send you a message with it.
Okay. Yeah. I need to get all these. Actually, Vaz, who's been a friend of mine here on the streaming world for a few years, he's the one who actually got me into VR. And actually the reason why I was playing The Invisible Hours, because he was the one who had brought it to my attention. He's like, this totally looks like a game up your alley. And he was right. So I'm not even a year in, I think, for playing VR, maybe 8 months or so. So there's still a lot of games I have yet to discover. I've always been at the mercy of playing them at cons just so I can put them on and play for a few moments. I think the first game I ever played in VR was Super Hot. At a convention.
Yeah, of course. Super Hot is freaking amazing.
But I couldn't catch up. But again, my first time playing VR, and I'm having to, I got to look behind me, or I got to pause this. And so I think you got to play for 10 minutes or 3 lives, whatever was first. And it was my 3 lives I got right away. But that really got me into it, though. So I'm glad that I did.
If you haven't gone back to Super Hot since then, it really is still a phenomenal piece of work.
I need to. I don't have it in VR, though. I had it regular game, so I have to go back and actually get it in that version so I can try it again.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Super Hot is 10 times better in VR, as are a lot of products. But Super Hot really is beautiful because its core mechanic is about what you do in VR, which is in the same way that the Invisible Hours core mechanic is about looking around, because that's something you do in VR. Super Hot is about controlling how much you move. Which is something you do naturally in VR. How much or how little. Again, for anybody that hasn't tried it, VR Super Hot is a game where time moves when you move. So the faster you move, the faster time moves. So it's basically you're trying to play in slow motion and take everybody out and do all your kung fu and your these red dudes. But it's phenomenal.
It is a lot of fun, and I definitely need to go back and just do that one there, because I did have a good time. Let's see, you say with motion, I think it's really contextual. I like that I can fly in Elite and War and Thunder all day, loop and loops and all, but something like Spider-Man can set you off. That's, I guess that's a fair way. I mean, to me, the envisioning of flipping around just doesn't, and to your point, I did do a roller coaster thing, and some of them were fine. And then some of them are not. So again, it probably just goes back to just do it more often, and you eventually get used to it, and we'll have fun with it. So what is your favorite medium to write for then? I assume it's got to be video games, but I saw that you had some like screenplays, a couple of TV credits under your belt as well.
I think everything has its place. I think you can do weirder stuff in games, that's for sure, in terms of structurally. I mean, which is to say that, a movie, broadly speaking, is 2 hours and somebody learns something about themselves, and has been the same for the last 130 years, give or take. Whereas a game, I don't know what a game story is still. I'm only going to know based on the product that we're making at the time. So in that sense, there's more adventure to be had. But the fine polish of linear media is something that you don't always get a chance to do in games.
So let's see here. Oh, let's see if I can get him to answer this one. So who was your favorite company to work for? You got a long list there.
Tequila Works, hands down.
Oh, perfect.
I've enjoyed working with everybody, but the beauty with Tequila Works was that when we create anything, you're somewhere on the sliding scale between art and commerce. And I came up through art school. That was my background. It was as a contemporary artist before I became a writer. So yes, I want something to be commercially viable. But I'm of the belief that you can arrive at something commercially viable in one of two directions. Either you're data driven and you're surmising what a consumer wants on the basis of data, which is a perfectly valid way of making a product. But I don't think that consumers, if you were to give them the opportunity to say, hey, do you want to buy something that is derived from data? Or do you want to buy something that is an attempt at art? I think people would rather have the art. And that was the experience with Tequila, is that they're an artistically inclined studio, but are interested in making commercially viable products. And that's very in tune with my tastes. And that's not to say that the other way of doing it is bad or wrong. It's just not my path.
You feel like you thrive better in the other environment. I got you. How did you get started with writing for games?
The way I got started writing for games, you definitely couldn't do anymore.
Oh no.
Yeah. So,
See how things move fast over the years. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when I got into games, I was doing this fine art degree at the time, and I was looking around and seeing, well, the employability status of the other people doing this art degree is about like 3%. Okay. So I need to do something else. And I was lucky enough that I had a tiny little art studio in North London that was opposite an Indian TV production company. And I got friendly with those guys. I ended up writing for Indian cable TV while I was doing my art degree, which is a bizarre thing for me to be doing. And while I was doing that, I wrote a sitcom that never got produced, but the script was shortlisted for this very obscure writing award that's no longer around anymore, called the TAPS Award. And for some reason, at that time, a company called Free Radical Design, who made the Time Splitters series, it was the guys who made GoldenEye and then went independent, made Time Splitters. They happened to be looking for a writer. They happened to get in touch with this very obscure awards body. And I went overnight from a £200 a week budget to a $30 million game, which I then very publicly screwed up, and I don't recommend doing it that way. Oh, no. But it was, I mean, in those days, the games industry was the Wild West. I mean, at that point, there were people who wrote games, but the idea of a narrative designer, a narrative director, a games writer didn't really exist in a formal sense. And when I ended up working with Free Radical, their intention was to keep me on as a writer for 6 weeks. I ended up staying with that crew for 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Because I was interested in like how a game's made. And I wanted to be able to I definitely don't consider myself to be ateknical in the scheme of games, but I can have a sort of sensible conversation with departments about how things get made. And so luckily they kept me around, and that sort of became the foothold of my career as you call it now.
Right. Oh, that's fun. So, because you had brought up the narrative director versus the writer thing, what would be the biggest difference between those two titles?
Even now, that varies from studio to studio. It's still not, every studio will have a formalized understanding of what that means, but not every studio has the same formalized understanding of what that means. There are times where a writer is directing through the page by proxy, and is kind of doing narrative direction, or narrative design through the writing. Or there are times where a narrative designer is really the writer. Broadly speaking, a narrative director is somebody who can help interstitch mechanics that express narrative with the sort of raw traditional forms of writing.
Okay, because I couldn't really find what the big difference was, so I was hoping maybe some other people were a little curious about that, like I am. It's so interesting to talk about this side of things. So like, what would you say for somebody who might be a budding writer? They want to break into the games industry, and somebody who's so well versed in it at this point. What's a good plan of attack for them to hopefully break into that sort of thing? Since you've been able to see how it's evolved.
I think that the good thing about games and the hard thing about games is that it is so amorphous. To say I want to get into games means as much Angry Birds as it does Metal Gear Solid.
Okay, that's fair.
So practically speaking, this is what I would do. I would write 2 samples, one that is a traditional linear teleplay, screenplay. The reason why I would do that is because if you're going to put all the effort into making something as a sample, part of your responsibility as a freelancer is to try and diversify your portfolio, which is to say, or to try and monetize your effort. So if you're going to make a sample, it makes sense to do it as something that you can sell, as well as something that you can show.
Okay.
So yes, I would do a screenplay or do a pilot for a show, something traditional, because then you can sort of show the bare bones of you, or the traditional bones of your writing skill. On the other side, I'd do something entwined to say, hey, I understand how to do something that's a non-traditional form. Then I would go on LinkedIn. I would make a list of 50 companies, all of which have less than 20 employees. And then I would doorstep all the EPs, executive producers, or the creative directors of those studios and say, hey, will you read my sample? And the reason why I say less than 20 employees is that when a company is that small, it means that it's easy for you to get a direct line to people who make decisions.
Okay.
So you don't have to go through an HR thing. You don't have to go through, like, if you're trying to pitch yourself to Ubisoft, the only way you're going to get to them is through a career portal. You're not going to talk to somebody who makes creative decisions until you've met certain criteria that maybe you're not so good at meeting, but you are the right person for the job. That's not to say that you shouldn't follow those paths, but in order to build your credits, go into smaller companies, and it's like a numbers game. It's like being telesales. Eventually, somebody's going to give you a shot, and once you have 1, you'll get 2. Once you get 2, you'll get 3.
So persistence is definitely key in this.
Sure,
absolutely.
A career in the arts mostly sucks. Mostly you're scratching around to pay the bills.
Yep.
And you're kept down by your own passion. But for some reason we keep doing it. So if you're going to do it, be efficient about it. Create. So I was very lucky that before I got into, I was doing the arts degree prior to getting my weird gig in Indian TV. I was in sales, and I happened to work under someone who I consider to be one of the master salespeople alive today. And being organized about how you're going to create business for yourself is vital. Your creativity is not enough, whether you like it or not. It's not enough. There has to be a plan of action to get the foothold. You have to be academic about how you're going to apply your creativity. Put all of your passion and your creativity into those 2 samples. But once you have that, your job is not writer. Your job is not artist. Your job is salesperson. And you have to find a way to sell yourself into those businesses.
That's great. No, and I feel like especially with today's era, creating your own seems to be a little bit more of the way of how it is, right? Like to show off what you can do, create it, and then present it. And I feel like that seems to be the way people are auditioning for their own stuff anymore.
I think that's true. I think you can be someone who's a Swiss Army knife who does it all. But even if you feel like, well, that's not me, I don't want to be a Swiss Army knife, I want to be a specialist. Both of those paths are equally valid. It's just a question of finding the right people to collaborate with to make products that allow you to be the kind of professional that you want to be. But the crucial thing is making a practical plan of action. Get the samples together. Get your call sheet together. Who am I going to call to try and convince to read this thing? And if they do read it, what am I going to do then?
Perfect. So if you're a budding writer out there, I think that's some good advice. And that transposes, I think, into most content creation nowadays as well. You know, it's what we're all striving to do. I know a lot of you in here are fantastic content creators. And so you just do. And then hope for the best. So, because I would imagine probably a lot of who you know, too, to be able to get that thrown in front of the right people at the right time. Or at least in my case, it always seemed to be like I had more successes if I knew someone who had a little bit of a foothold and I could present what I had to them and go from there. But
it is still I just want to press that again. Yes, it's good to know someone who can help you. Mm-hmm. But if that hasn't happened by chance, if you don't already have a person there that you're lucky enough to say, oh, this person can give me a foothold, be practical, make that hit list. 50 companies with under 20 employees, who's the creative director, who's the executive producer. Someone out of those 50 people that you doorstep is going to say, okay, I'll read it. And then someone out of that tiny little list of people who read it say, okay, maybe you can help us on this little thing. Once you have that, that's your foothold. Then you can go to the next person and say, hey, go through the same process again, but now you say, hey, I'm not just the person with the sample, I'm the person with the credit. And then on the next one, hey, I'm a person with 2 credits.
Mm-hmm. And that's just slowly built up from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it to your passion. It's not enough.
Yeah. Especially if you're that serious about it. Definitely. Right. Great stuff. Just create it. And I feel like there's always that disconnect, I think, nowadays with that as well, because everyone's version of working hard and creating their own things and putting it out there is so vastly different from one person to the next. That I guess maybe it's just the world we live in with the streaming world and things like that. Like the ideas behind working so hard are so much different, I think, from everyone. Oh, I've been at this for years. I should have had this already, or something to that effect, instead of kind of reflecting and maybe doing what you said. Like, are you putting it out there? Are you going to the right companies? Are you?
I think we have to put the same effort that we do into creating the content as we do into selling the content. You might get lucky and maybe you build the audience, but in order to build the audience, that takes organization, takes commitment, takes consideration, takes planning. Be practical. Do the parts you don't enjoy. Eat your vegetables. You need your fiber.
That's true. The selling factor, I think, is probably the biggest disconnect that I see. And still, I'm even working on that to a degree. You know, you're just trying to, where are the correct places to market, network, talk to, put it in front of? Each medium's different.
I think it's also, I mean, the psychology of it is complex, because we put all that effort into creating something and you get the rush of satisfaction to say, I made something that I think is good. Now imagine that you've got to take something that's validated you, you're going to try and put it out in front of somebody else and say, hey, do you think this is worth the validation that I feel? Mm-hmm. And they might say no, and most of them are going to say no. That's a hard speed bump for the brain to get over, but you have to do it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's why I respect those creators, though, too, because you're willing to put your baby out there into the world knowing that it could very well get rejected. But the perseverance of those who keep doing it regardless to get that one, because I know for me that's the one thing that I respect the most out of content creators or independent developers or anything like that. It's just making that step to put it out there. Let's see. Do you think platforms like YouTube have are beneficial for writers, directors, creators in general?
I think that yes is the short answer, and I think you got to think of it as like going to the gym, like doing your kung fu. The more you train, the better you're going to be. The more you're going to understand. Opportunities to create and fail, even before you get to a point where you feel like you've got something to sell. That's valuable and important, whatever platform you decide to do that experimentation on. And yes, visibility is part of trying to create luck for yourself. That's part of the organization of selling yourself. So yeah, absolutely. Any platform where someone can look is useful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right. Yeah. Too much content and the good stuff gets lost. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with like YouTube and stuff. I know their algorithms are kind of all over the place, so I'm not really sure. I
think it's not a platform's job to sell you.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that yes, I'm sure once you have a certain audience built, how an algorithm behaves may be frustrating or not. But in order to get to that point, you're still having to do it the old sawdust way. Who am I going to go to? How am I going to convince them?
Right. Like these platforms are great tools to be able to use to showcase that. And then it's up to you how we're going to put that in front of the eyes is how I've always kind of looked at it. Which I know that's a whole other debate, right? People are talking about what's fair with this algorithm or what the platform is doing for you. Well, I know we've had you for about an hour here. I'm going to refresh this and see if there was any other ones because I definitely want to be respectful of your time. I think I've just been kind of seeing them as they pop up on here too. Is there any other questions? Because I'm probably going to release him here since I've had him for an hour and I don't want to keep him for a long time. And I know it's early for you in Seattle, or earlier, because that's where you're at right now. But yeah,
give me the tough questions, guys. I'm more than happy to try and be useful to you.
Put it in there, yeah. Because of course, everyone always wants to ask about Valve, and I know I'm not allowed to. Man, they keep a tight ship. I need to find that one disgruntled ex-employee. Is what I need to find.
Just hang out on Reddit long enough, someone will show up. Look, the short answer about Valve is that it's a remarkable place full of remarkable people, and it's hard for people who haven't been inside that system to understand why and how it functions in the way that it does. And you know, the Valve handbook is available online. You can read about how it functions, the flat structure functions. But yeah, it's a fascinating place.
Yeah, I think I kind of have a little click of maybe what you were working on over there, and I can't wait to see what's going on. Because you left in January, right? So you were there for a little over a year?
I was
trying to remember the tweet that I saw.
And on site for 6 months.
Oh, okay. Let's see. How does a writer improve his writing is something you've always wondered.
That's an interesting question. I hope that mine has improved. But so look, it depends on where you're at. I think that everybody's going to say read stuff, and that's true. Read as much as you can, whatever medium that is. You know, if you're working in games, mostly you're looking at stuff that's going to be on screen, so that means you're looking at screenplays, teleplays, that kind of thing. There's plenty of resources online to read the best movies, the best shows, and see how they were put together. But basically, what drama boils down to is intention and obstacle. Who fights who over what? And if you can apply that filter to not just your story, but also to the scene, and not just to the scene, but to the line. And that's something that I try very hard to do in The Invisible Hours, is that every line expresses intent or expresses an obstacle to somebody else. And that's the thing that sort of peels away the thing that makes most new writing a little crummy, which is that you're trying to get away all the peripheral unnecessary information and just boil down to, well, what is the conflict between these two people in this moment? And how does that relate to the conflict of the grander story? Intention and obstacle. What's a character's intent and what is the obstacle?
Does that help you out? I always thought, like, how fun that would be to be a writer. And then I start to write, and then I'm that person where I'm like, why am I doing this? Flips the table. I don't even like my own stuff. So I'm like, I'll just be on the other side of it. I'll just emote your words. How's that?
But even as an actor, I mean, that's the responsibility of a writer, is to think, well, okay, it's not just about the words as they appear in final draft in front of you, but also if someone's going to perform this, an actor, some actors will want to know the sort of detailed biography of a character to sort of immerse themselves in it. But when it comes to the scene, when it comes to the line, the only thing that matters is intent. What does the character intend with this line? And in terms of the, let's say, the sophistication of the writing, how much of that intent is obfuscated by the line? So if I say, I hate you, but I mean, deep down, I love you. My intent is there. It's obfuscated by the writing, and it gives the actor something to play against. And And that's before you even see, well, who else am I in the scene with? So being conscious of the intent of every line, that's crucial. And if you find the intent is, well, I as a writer need the audience to know X, then you fucked up.
Oh, yeah? Interesting. I wouldn't have thought about it that way. Ooh, we're getting some in now. Here we go. Let's see. From Kristen, where do you get your inspiration from? Do you get it from real life experiences, things you've gone through, or people you speak to as examples?
I think that, well, I work in a sort of fairly commercial space, so it's not, I don't make art as catharsis, but I think it is, in my opinion, it's true to say that no matter how commercial your art is, somewhere hidden in there, either on purpose or by accident, is a little tiny cell, a nucleus of human truth that the product is built around one way or another. So in terms of structure, we would talk about that as what is the theme of this. So theme is an interesting word because it's one of those terms that people sort of use with ubiquity, but don't necessarily have a universal understanding of what it means. Mm-hmm. So from a point of writing, theme is a morally slanted question to which there is no binary answer. And that is going to come from within you. So if you look at a movie like The Dark Knight, let's say, most people have seen The Dark Knight. Mm-hmm. At the center of that drama is a question that is something like, what is justice? And you can't say justice is yes or justice is no. There are many subtle shades. So in that movie, you have Rachel Dawes, who believes that the law is justice. Mm-hmm. Then you have Commissioner Gordon, who believes that the law is justice, but he'll let Batman do what he does, but he won't do what Batman does because that's not his justice. Then you have Batman, who'll drop Eric Roberts off a fire escape and break his legs, but he won't kill him because that's not justice.
Right.
Then you have the Joker, who believes that chaos is justice. And you have Harvey Dent, who travels from one end of that spectrum to the other. And it means that you can put any of those characters in any combination, in any scene, and they're always going to have something that is thematically relevant to conflict about, to have different intentions about, to have different obstacles about, intent and obstacle. But the crucial thing is that whatever that morally slanted question is, has to be something that you care about. And that can be in space, it can be underground, it can be in the past, it can be the future, it can be whatever wild window dressing there may be across the rest of that story. There has to be something in the middle of it that is real to you, because that's the thing that's going to make the writing speak to somebody else.
I love that. I love that. I would have never actually thought about it in that perspective before. Oh man.
And by the way, that's a very, 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 very hard thing to do, because you're not just trying to combine something that you care about and may have fixed opinions on, and trying to split it out into a dramatic debate between a network of characters. So that's something that's very structural to do, but something that's very personal. And that really is probably the hardest part of writing, is having an academic approach to something that's fundamentally not academic. Your feelings are not academic, but to exposit them through a script is academic.
Excellent. Well, hopefully that helped you out there, Kristen. I love it. I love it. Let's see. Oh, got a couple more popped up here. Let's see. Does consuming content, movies, games, etc., cause you any problems creatively? Like, do you have any issues blocking that out to create your own material, or does it help and inspire other ideas?
I don't know. I think it's both. I think that to ignore other content is to say you don't want to make something that should exist in the marketplace, which is fine. You can make art for yourself. Mm-hmm. But if it's for an audience, you need to know who the audience is, and you need to know what they've seen, what they've enjoyed, what they haven't enjoyed. All those things are useful things to know. So yeah, I think if you're trying to make a career, and to be honest, it's something that happens to all of us. Like, I'm very conscious that as I get older, there are areas of games that I'm just not plugged into. Like, I'm not plugged into Fortnite. I'm not that guy.
You and me both.
But and that's not to say there's anything wrong with Fortnite, but it's just eventually you're going to sort of become unplugged to parts of it, and you become specialized. Mm-hmm. But you need to know what those products are as best you can.
Hey, if everybody liked the same thing, I always said the world would be pretty dull. So not saying any of these things are bad things. It's just not necessarily for me. So I'm not your audience. I'm not the one to market towards.
And I see the question there from...
in terms of VR, let's see. What do you think it would take to make it more popular? Affordability, comfort, lacking a killer app. Assuming
it's interesting. I had this conversation with somebody yesterday. There are already probably 50 killer apps in VR.
Okay.
And the issue is not the content at this point. The issue is price point and evangelization. Because if you look at a gameplay video of a flat game, you understand the experience by and large. Mm-hmm. But as much as you think you can imagine, and I was the same, as much as you think you can imagine what VR is like from looking at it on a flat screen, that ain't it.
No, you're right.
And the beauty of the Oculus Quest that we were talking about earlier is that previously, if you wanted to say to somebody, hey, VR is amazing, you've got to play this, you got to pack up your sensors, your light stand, your PC, your headset, your handset, and take it all to a buddy's house, or you got to convince them to come over to your place. Mm-hmm. The Oculus Quest, put it in a little box, take it to your friend's house, set it up in their garden. It requires nothing. That's the thing that's going to change it, is that we, as people who are passionate about VR, it's easier for us to show it to other people. Mm-hmm. And it's cheap for them to buy it and then go and show it to other people. That we are the sales force for VR.
It does feel like it's more of a word of mouth thing, right? Like you finally knew a friend who has VR that's talked you into giving it a go. And then, that's exactly how it happened with me. Like VR always seemed cool. I'm not sure I would have ever made the leap on my own unless I had the ability to be able to put myself inside it and see.
But part of the difficulty also is that it's a combination of factors. One is VR got lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of press a couple of years ago, when, in my opinion, it was not consumer ready. Okay. I think if we had held on until now that there's a wireless headset, albeit with a little less processing power, that would have been super useful. But unfortunately, it wasn't timed that way. Yeah. But also, there still is an issue with people's understanding of what VR is. And I mean that even for people who have tried VR. So if you try the Quest, as great as it is, you might think, well, that is as much technical grunt as we're going to get out of VR. But that ain't it. I mean, like the index is going to be 10 times the power of that. So even if you tried VR, even if you've had great experiences, you still don't necessarily know what the medium is capable of. So that's another layer of complexity. But at least if you can get people through the door with an experience that is good, that should be the first step on the road. But I think we had another bump, not just with the press being mistimed, but also that 360 and VR, at some point, the definition of what VR was encompassed 360. Right. And so there are lots of people out there who've seen a 360 Facebook video and think that's what VR is. So it's a weird messaging issue, experience issue, evangelization issue, pricing issue, technical issue. But we're eking our way forward. And I talked about this before, but if you look at the uptake graph of mobile phone technology, the graph curve is almost exactly the same as the uptake of VR. And there was, once upon a time, the idea that we would have a phone that we carry around with us was insane. Right. I still, I'm old enough to remember pre-phone age. I'm old enough to remember pre-computer age, if you can imagine such a thing.
It was a thing, right? Yeah, how did we make it so many millennia? I don't know.
All of those things seemed like needless luxuries, and now they become essential. And the same will happen with VR, but it will take 10, 15 years to get to the point. For now, it's just a really cool, fun thing to do that everybody should try.
Did you get to try the Valve Index? Did you get to get in it?
I did, yeah.
How is it?
I did lots in there. It's super cool, and you should all buy it.
I want to get inside the headset first, because I'll have to admit that price point's kind of scary. And it's going to be. Now, for those who maybe already have VR, they're probably more willing to. And I like how they've pieced it out, at least. So like if you wanted to just get the headset, if you've already got Vive controllers, like these work with that. So I do like how that is, but I want to get inside one and I don't know how I could try it other than buying it right away, which I don't know.
The user base will increase and eventually someone will get into your Venn diagram.
Hopefully. Or maybe I can just convince a Best Buy to put it up or something like that so I can step in there and do it. Let's see. From Kristen here, what's the most memorable, best experience you had writing a game? Or I guess you could say, which ones do you look at and go, hell yeah, writing for this game was awesome. I loved doing that. Or does anything you write for give you a thought like that? Like, yeah, I did that.
Well, Invisible Hours was my favorite experience because it was, it's rare that narrative in the game is the backbone of the game. Usually you're trying to sort of merge yourself with content that's already been created, either art content or design content or some kind of marketing or conceptual content that you're trying to fit in with. So we didn't have that with this, which was great, very freeing. And also our rehearsal process and all that was unusual for games. Really enjoyed that. But outside of that, I really got the kick out of Rhyme as well, which was the game that I made with Tequila Works before the Invisible Hours. And the thing that was interesting about that is that as a freelancer, a lot of what you're doing as a writer is not saying, hey, what about this idea? And hoping that the game will then follow you. You're coming into something that's in progress, and really they're looking for the writing to explain why they made what they made, which seems sort of weird because you think, well, everybody who's creating something knows why they create it. But in the heat and speed and confusion of production, that can very easily get lost. So writing is there to create a cohesion of existing content. So in order to create that cohesion, if I go into a product that's already in motion, you're trying to look at all the stuff that's been made and say, well, what does all this stuff have in common? And if we can figure out what it has in common, maybe we can understand what this game is about. So that thing that I was talking about before about theme, you're looking for some kind of thread that connects the pieces that have been made. And in the case of Rhyme, when I went on to Rhyme, they had this beautiful Studio Ghibli style sunny piece of an island that they'd made for their vertical slice. And they had this this boy who looked like maybe he was a prince one time. And they thought that maybe this was going to be a game about an abandoned civilization and a king who left the island or something. They weren't quite sure. But looking around the studio, I could see, well, this is a studio filled with people who are of a certain age, at a certain stage in life, who just started having their own kids. And it struck me that this was not a game about a boy on an island, but this was a game about death. In so much as when you reach a certain age and you're staring down the barrel of your own mortality and you've got kids that you're responsible for, and you're getting to an age where you're starting to fear the life, the enduring potential of your own creativity, which is to say that right now you might feel fiery and passionate about what you create, but as you get older, that fire does diminish. That's what I eventually surmised that they were trying to say with that game, but were unable to articulate. And so in conversation with those guys, eventually they came to the agreement that perhaps that's what the game was about. And this is kind of a spoiler to talk about it, but the game became a metaphor for the 5 stages of grief. And you can still play it, even though that kind of spoils the story a little bit, but the interpretation of what the story is will still be different depending on where you are in that spectrum.
Sure.
But that was the crucial thing, was creating a prism through which all content must pass. So the value of that academically is that when you go into a production in a game, it's very different to going into production on a movie. So if you go into something in linear media, the costume designer is very unlikely to come up to a writer and say, oh, you should do the scene like this. But in games, it's a much flatter medium. So that sort of thing happens all the time, where people who are not necessarily in your department would come in and try and exact influence, which is a normal and healthy thing to do in that medium. But in order to not descend into creative chaos, which is where two people have, or a group of people have completely subjective ideas about what the right thing to do is, you need to have some kind of filter through which ideas have to pass. So let's say you like idea A, I like idea B. How do we figure out which idea is better? Well, you're the boss, maybe we'll do yours, or I'm the writer, so maybe we'll do mine, or whatever spurious managerial reason there may be to choose one solution over another. When really the solution is to say, well, okay, what is the game about? What is the game trying to say as a work of art? What is it trying to say? And then we say, well, okay, does idea A fit through that hole? Or does idea B fit through that hole? And they both might be 10 out of 10 ideas, but if one of those ideas doesn't fit through that hole, you know which one's going to get cut. So that was the process we went through on Ryan. Been through that process on lots of different games, but in that case, it was well articulated, and I think worked pretty well. The other game that I really enjoyed as a sort of academic challenge was this is back around 2012, I think. So when I was briefly creative director at Crytek UK, and while I was there, I went to a student showcase, and these three 19-year-old guys came in, and they showed a game called Cube, Q-U-B-E, which visually looked a lot like Portal and was a first-person puzzle game.
Yeah.
But on the design level was actually very different from Portal and was extremely original at the time. And I remember me and actually the editor of Edge who broke her wrist playing Resident Evil Live. We were both completely floored by this demo. And these kids afterwards, they said, "Oh, we want to use this as our resume to get jobs." I said, "Don't do that. Sell this game." And whether they listened to me or not, I don't know. But they went on to sell it, and they sold, I think, something like 350,000 copies of this thing.
Wow!
Which is for three guys was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And years later, I should backtrack and say there was no narrative in that game at all. It was purely puzzle. Years later, when they were going to port to console, they came back to me when I was freelance and said, "Hey, would you write a story for our game? But we can't afford to build any new content." So it means that the whole thing had to be VO over the existing game. So trying to create a narrative that seems like it was always the intent of a game that was finished was a really interesting process, because I got in the case of Cube, and the version that I worked on is a game called Cube Director's Cut that you can get as a pack. That in the case of that, I could look at the reviews and see what their interpretation of that product was in the absence of narrative.
Okay.
And one of the things that kept coming up was people saying, "Well, this looks just like Portal. Looks just like Portal." I'd say it over and over and over and over again. And it meant that I realized, well, I can actually use their expectation of what the narrative of this product would be on the basis of the fact that people are expecting something like Portal to create twists in the narrative. And that's something that you couldn't get in another medium. There's no way, like you couldn't do that in a movie, because it needs to have come out, been reviewed, then altered in order to create that. I mean, you get a little bit of that with like screenings for people. You can adjust stuff, but in that very particular way is completely unique to games.
What was the reception like? Did you hear from a lot of people who had done both versions before it had come out? Like, what kind of experience change did it have for them?
The thing that I found most interesting about it is I've never been able to see before the Metacritic value of a story. You could see it right there because you had the pre-Metacritic and the post-Metacritic. There were some people who really liked it, and there's some people who hated it. Because I think for some people they liked it when it was silent and lonely, and other people felt it was too silent and lonely. Okay.
Well, then at least you had the best of both worlds out there for them then, right? Like we have which version of it for you. You want it without or you want it with?
I wouldn't say either version is necessarily better than the other, but it was definitely interesting to be able to apply people's expectations to it in such a specific way.
That's so cool. Like just that experience of having to write for something that was already out there. Like I found that fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see. Can you see a future where FMV video games are reborn in VR, like Seventh Guest VR, for example? I kind of hope so. I'm an FMV addict myself. I love full motion video games like that. And I've seen the attempts, I guess, where it's more of a, what do you call it? Like that you're in the game, they're trying to look at you FMV wise, and I don't think it's quite there yet. But
so in terms of so capturing a photorealistic human in VR, you use a technique called volumetric capture, where you're basically creating a green room box with a bunch of cameras, and you sit a person in the middle of that box, and they do their performance, and that becomes a 3D asset that you place into a 3D engine. And the difference between that and motion capture is that you can't edit it, or at least traditionally you can't edit it, because it's a video. So in the early days of the Invisible Hours, when we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do with that, we did look at the time, early volumetric capture. And because we had so many sync interdependencies in the Invisible Hours to say, well, this person needs to leave the scene at this time and be in this place at this time, you needed to be able to tweak the motion. And you can only really do that at the time in motion capture, because you have the little 3D skeleton inside the character, and you can puppeteer them if you want to, or you're using motion capture, or a combination of the two. And you couldn't use volumetric because everything in the Invisible Hours is always on screen. So if somebody needs to walk a little bit faster or be somewhere a little bit sooner, you can't change it, because you'd see the cut, because it's like watching a video, but it's four-dimensional. However, there is emerging technology where certain edits can be made to motion to volumetric capture. So we're at a point now where you can slightly retarget like where someone's eyes might be looking in volumetric capture. You can slightly retarget like where someone's head might be looking in volumetric capture, or maybe move somebody's arm a little bit. That's super exciting. Sounds really boring, but that is the step towards like a whole new generation of performance capture. If that gets to a place where with machine learning it understands, like when you're on, I don't know, some site, and then in order to access it, it says, hey, click on 4 street signs. Yeah. You're teaching a piece of machine learning in Google to understand what a street sign is. You're working to create AI. So once machine learning can delineate between what an eyelid is, and what teeth are versus lips, and what fingers are versus a closed hand. Once you get all of that stuff and you can start to edit 4-dimensional video, that's super exciting. And that's when you get to true photorealistic VR.
Is that like the same kind of tech where they're using it nowadays, movies, where we're seeing like a revival of maybe passed away actors that are now in this movie?
Yeah, deep fakes are part of the same sort of technology, but it's trickier. In the deep fake, you're editing a 2-dimensional video. When you're editing a 3-dimensional video,
that's fair. You're right. Yeah,
that's tougher, but it does stem from the same tech.
That would be cool to do, because honestly, like FMV, I've played them since they were brand new. And I do enjoy that medium. It would be really cool to see them finally nail that in VR. Let's see. Do you sometimes think about past works and think, what was I thinking back then? Or would I do it differently now? Look at that game. You're like, why the hell did I do that?
My career started with a giant explosive disaster. It was a huge public failure that basically torched my career for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And it took a long time to claw my way out from under that wreckage. And yeah, if I could change it, I guess I would change it, but it was full of valuable lessons about how not to screw up a giant production. Right. Yeah, inevitably. I think I've been lucky that I had a good couple of years on a run. Okay. But yeah, I've worked on some really crummy stuff, loads of crummy stuff. You got to pay the bills. I've been lucky enough to work on stuff that was good. I've been unlucky enough to work stuff that was bad. Sometimes it was bad because of me. Sometimes it wasn't. And sometimes the good stuff wasn't good because of me.
Yeah. No, well, those are all the experience you take with you. And now you've done enough that you can just keep the cream at the top, right?
I don't know about that. But I mean, you're always trying to find something that's going to be worth your time. And I'm in a weird place now where to make a game, if you're really, 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 really lucky, from the moment that somebody has the idea to the moment that somebody buys the product. 3 years if you're lucky. Sometimes 4, sometimes 5, sometimes 6, sometimes 7. So how many games am I going to make before I retire? 4, maybe?
Yeah.
So what those 4 are, one would hope, are things that are worth doing. And those things are hard to find. So I have no doubt that I'll work on crummy stuff before it's all over. But I hope that one of those 4 will be something worth the sacrifices that you make to do something creative for a living.
I guess the nice thing about that is crummy is subjective, right? So, I mean,
I think in some cases,
other than like blatant, you know, maybe a bug here that never bothered to get fixed or something like that. But I think that's the nice thing about having all these different genres of video games is just, to me, it's just subjective on which form you want to play it in. And now we've got options. I want to.
There are all sorts of places to fail now. It's great.
There's great, exactly. There's way more opportunities for you to hang your head and cry in shame at the end of the evening, right? Well, I don't see anything else popping up here for questions. So, is there anything maybe you want to plug before we're done? Something you want the people to be looking out for, or if you can't, I understand that too.
Nothing of mine. Let me think about who else's stuff I'd want to plug. And in answer to that question, do I have a genre I haven't written for but always wanted to?
Oh, that's a good one.
No.
No, you've covered it all, right?
I mean, it's interesting because if you work in linear media, if you work in film, by and large, you are trying to kind of pigeonhole yourself as fast as you can, because then you become like, oh, he's the thriller guy, or oh, he's the comedy guy. But in games, if you can only work one genre, you ain't going to work much. Yeah. So I've been lucky enough to work across just about every type of production, just about every genre. Some more successfully than others. But
those crummy ones, you know.
I've always lent into mystery and into science fiction, but no, I've had a taste of most things. And in terms of plugging stuff, look at Chair in a Room for sure.
I gotta put that one. Is it scary though? I think that's what threw me off. Is I will admit I am a huge freaking wuss when it comes to scary games, and then putting me in a VR setting. Panic.
A Chair in a Room is I would say it is more philosophically scary than it is jump scary. Okay. I think it's well worth taking a look at. Look at anything that Pocket Money Games are making. They're only a tiny little company, but Pocket Money Games, who made Dimension Hunter and a bunch of other like quirky little VR things, I think they're about to do something really interesting, and I would keep an eye on them.
Pocket, okay.
Pocket Money Games.
Pocket Money Games. And
I would definitely play Sorrento. I forget the name of the studio, but Sorrento VR which is SAIRENTO, I think.
Oh, okay.
It's super good. And again, really, the thing that's fun about VR is that people are taking risks and saying, well, hey, what about this? Because people aren't necessarily sure what's fun, what's not, what the human brain can endure and what it can't. So that's the thing that's really exciting about VR. I would look at, again, I forget the name of the company, but the guys who made Irrational Exuberance, I think, are very artistically inclined, less gameplay inclined, but I think the stuff they make is from the heart and is interesting. Crikey. Ooh. Play the Division 2. There's good people working on that.
There you go. You were involved in the first one, right?
I did a little contracting on the first one, but they're a good bunch of guys over there.
I feel like people love that game.
Yeah, it's a good little crew. Crikey, what else? Buy the Index, obviously.
Come on, guys, just fork it over.
Yeah. No, I'm just about to cover it.
And keep your eye on his name, guys. I am going to post your Twitter in chat, because, you know, go follow his Twitter. I'm sure he'll keep everyone apprised on that kind of stuff, on what the next thing is that you should be looking out for, that he'll be working on. And I mean, thank you so much for your time. This was very interesting, and I feel like I could pick your brain about this for a long time. I've never gotten to speak to someone with this perspective on it before, so I know I really enjoyed it. I really have.
Very kind to be invited, and I'm just some dude who's giving it a go. So I'm no different to anybody else in chat. So I'm at your disposal. Find me on Twitter. If you get stuck, let me know.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your time. It's always good to hear that story of I wanted that, I fought for that, I'm doing that, and that's right there. So thank you so much, guys. Go follow him. Go play The Invisible Hours. It really is a fantastic game. If you have VR, I highly recommend doing it in VR, but you can also play it without VR as well. The story is fantastic, phenomenal. Rob, thank you so much. I'm going to kick it over to the BRB screen right now while we let him go for the day, and then I'll be back with just a little bit more right after this. So hang around, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.